Alright, so the next step to assembling this entire kit is to ground down the motor shaft to accept the new rotor hub. As you guys can see here, I've got the 3 set screws already in there. Not necessary to complete this step, but I just thought I'd go ahead and get them in there just so I don't get lost. Several things that we can see in the picture here. Napkin, some of the emery cloth that I send out with the kit, and some WD-40. What we're going to do is we're going to wet the emery cloth with some WD-40 before we start to ground this down, and that will prevent all the dust, the metal dust off the shaft from flying off, possibly getting into the bearing or into the motor, and just causing issues that we can just go ahead and avoid. So a very simple way to prevent any problems later. Keep a napkin or some kind of cloth handy so that as you're sanding this down, you can keep cleaning away the material that's going to be generated. I've got my motor all hooked up right now to my ESC, and I'm going to run this up with some 6S batteries for this process. Once everything fits, once the hub fits on there, I'm going to give the motor a high RPM spool up here just to see and make sure that it's running balanced. In this case, the motor is a Het 868 685 kV, and this will be a good test on this fan because I want to see how well it does. So let me go ahead and get everything set up, and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm back. I've got the batteries all hooked up, and we'll go ahead and give it a quick test to make sure the motor is running. There we go. I'm just using the trim at this point and finding the lowest speed that I can, which was, you just heard it just a second ago. But just play around with your ESC and your radio to see what that point will be, and that's all you need. It's running a little rough, so I'll go ahead and speed it up a little bit. It's not going to make a huge difference if it's spinning a little faster than the slowest possible setting. So let's go ahead and get started with the sanding here. So here's that same piece of emery cloth, and I've got it wet down with some WD-40. Basic process is to take it. What I like to do is make a small loop here, just as you see it, and then I'll start very slowly. I do want to bring it all the way to the back of the face of the motor here. And we're just going to continue doing this, taking away a little bit at a time until it's all done. Okay, so let me go ahead and do a little bit more. I'm going to pause for a second and we'll clean off any of the residue that's already on there. Okay, and every few minutes I'll just go ahead and test it out to make sure I don't overdo it. So we still have a bit more to go. Alright, now I'm going to take some really fine grit sandpaper here. This is about 213 grit, just to give it a very nice finish. Okay, let's see how that does. And there we have it. Perfect fit. There is absolutely no play in that whatsoever. And that's going to slide on and off of there without any kind of issues at all. So that's the completion of this step. And the next step will be to now take this, we're going to mark where we need to put in some flat spots on the motor shaft. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just tighten them down and test the motor out as you guys see it, looking for any kind of vibration on the higher end of the RPM spectrum. So let's see how that goes. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just tightened the set screws down just enough to be able to hold the new rotor hub on there. Don't over tighten it at this point. You don't want to do too much. It's just enough to be able to hold this on there. It doesn't take a whole lot to accomplish that. So let's see how it does at full RPM. I went ahead and got my heavy duty gloves out because the motor's getting kind of warm at this point. So let's see how it does. Okay, and that's doing extremely well. There is no vibration whatsoever. So at this point, I can verify that the motor itself is good and the hub itself is good. You guys really should not have any issues with this hub as far as balancing goes. It's going to come 100% balanced when you guys get it. The motors, I've had very hit and miss experiences with the Het motors at least. At this point, I've seen one 590 kV motor and one 685 kV motor, and both of them were unbalanced, and that was just the motor itself, not the fan. And I only found this out after assembling the entire thing together. So just watch out for that, and that's why it's important to check the motor in this step, so that if there's any issues, you guys can send this back and get your money back for these motors. Okay guys, the next step we're going to work on here is to make the groove that we need to make in the mounting bracket, as can be seen right here. So this is a fan that I've already built, and you guys can kind of see the groove I had to make in the stock mounting bracket to get the bolt or the nut to fit in there properly. So that's the next step, and let's get to it. Okay, so just like before, I've got the Dremel ready to go. As you guys can see, the same sort of setup mounted to my table with a clamp on it. You know, this is cheap stuff we probably already all have, or you can go pick it up from Harbor Freight for less than 20-30 bucks. So another thing I recommend you guys have for this is a decent pair of gloves. So I'll be using some leather gloves. And that's because I'm going to be holding the mounting bracket in my hand as I do this, and as you guys can imagine, it's going to get pretty warm as you start removing the material off of it. So here's what the mounting bracket looks like for me. The ones you guys have might be a little bit different. In the older ones, they did not have this groove that you guys see here milled into it, and also in the older ones, there isn't a radius in this L-shaped bracket. So some of the older ones are just straight 90-degree angles rather than this radius that we can see on this one. So this one adds a little bit of a challenge with that radius, because you have to somehow get that groove completely perpendicular to where that nut is going to sit. But we can solve that relatively easily with the Dremel here and the cutting bit on it. The bit that you guys are looking at on the Dremel, just your standard rotary cutoff tool that you can again buy from any hardware store, including cheapest place is probably again Harbor Freight. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mounting bracket as the Dremel is running, and I'll just make that groove the best I can by hand and just kind of eyeballing it. The width, it needs to be just enough for the nut to sit in, and the depth has to be enough, obviously, for the nut to sit in and for you to be able to get the screw or the bolt through this hole and have everything sit at a 90-degree angle. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've changed the camera angle just a little bit so you guys can see exactly what I'll be doing, but you can see from the side here, I'm just looking to get get this thing as 90 degrees or as close to 90 degrees as possible as I go through the process here. It'll become pretty clear here how this is going to work. So here we go. Make sure you get some goggles on for this as well. Okay, so there is the groove, and now we're going to go ahead and test it with the nut and see how well it works. Okay, so here it is, and that's basically what we're looking for. As you guys can see, that screw is completely perpendicular to this flat surface. Okay, that top surface, and that's what you want in every direction. You want it to be completely perpendicular. And we can see here the nut is sitting in that little groove pretty nicely, and that's going to give you all the clearance you need to make this work. So repeat the same thing on the other side, and that's it. So pretty quick. Another thing, if you guys don't own a Dremel and you don't have a cutting bit, a slightly uglier solution is to just take a drill bit, and rather than making a groove here like I did, you can just drill a hole in this portion right here. Drill a hole big enough to, again, let this nut sit in place, and it'll accomplish the same task here. So, alright, I'm going to go ahead and get the other one finished, and we'll continue on with the assembly. Alright, let's get to the assembly of the shroud with all the different stator blades. This process it's not too long, should not take any more than about 10 minutes at this point. We've completed a couple of things. I've already finished making the making the grooves in the brackets here for the long stators. Here's all my stators. I've got the long stators down here somewhere. Here's one of them. Need two of those, and then the smaller ones as well. Brand new shroud right here. This one does not have the cutout, as you guys can see. Older fans are obviously going to have that cutout in there, but not a big issue. And then here are the two screws and the nuts for the long stators. First thing to do here is to start off with the long stators, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and just make sure that there's nothing in there as far as an obstruction goes. That's going to make my life hard. And the other thing obviously I need is the hub. Can't forget this, or the center body. So this guy right here. First step, keep in mind this is the leading edge, so you want to keep that out front. I've got and this is the front of the center body, and that needs to be going in the same direction, so something like this. And we'll start off with the long stators, which need to go right about here. So I know that this groove is for the long stator because clearly it's longer than the others. The blade will sit in here in this manner, and we'll go ahead and get the screw in there from the inside so it'll remain on there as we're putting this thing together. I'm going to do one at a time. Let's get this guy in. Okay, there goes that one. Keep a hand on it so it doesn't fall out, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the other side. It's a little bit difficult to do with the camera in front of me here, but I'll do the best I can. Alright, that's in there. What I'm gonna do is just secure this the best I can for the moment, just to keep things from falling apart on me. I'm not gonna tighten everything down just yet. Okay, there we go. That's hand tight, and we're going to go ahead and leave it at that for now. Next step is to go ahead and start getting my short blades in there, and the best way to do that is from the front. And just like as you would on a car, you don't want to just start with one and then go around the horn. You want to go opposite, and then that'll keep everything nice and even, because on the newer fans, this can get a little bit tight as you hit some of the blades later on in the assembly. So to prevent issues with that, you just want to make sure that you don't start on one end and just kind of go around the horn, because then these ones will be very difficult to get in there. Another thing I'm going to go ahead and do is make a small notch in one of these blades, which is going to be right here on the leading edge right here, and that'll help me get my Allen wrench in there when I need it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, just with a small knife. Doesn't need to be perfect, just big enough to where it'll give you enough space to do what you need to do there. So I'll be back with that. Okay, so here it is, and that's it. I did it by hand. Does not need to be perfect. You're not going to see it once it's all assembled, and not going to make a difference. So, alright, there's one blade, and now I'm just going to start going opposite and get the rest of them in.
Gonna hold off on the screws for now.
Okay, just a little trick here. If some of these blades towards the end get a little tight, a couple of tricks you can get them that you can use to still get them in there. Number one, if it's super tight, you may need to just sand a little bit off of the blade. It's probably not going to happen on a used fan. They've compressed a little bit over time, so I never have an issue on older fans, but on newer fans, this is sometimes a problem. And then it's just a matter of stretching that shroud as much as possible on. So with my left hand here, I'm pulling to the left on the hub here, and with my right hand, as I'm trying to slide the fan in there, I'm pulling a little bit on the shroud right here, and it should get in there. There we go. Okay, so there it is. That's all of them. Next step is to go ahead and get all the screws in. And of course, make sure that everything lines up to make that happen. Alright, there we go. Got the screws in there. Next step, I'm going to take a drill and tighten everything down. You can also do this by hand, but I prefer the drill just because otherwise it would take forever. Just be careful if you are going to use a drill. Don't go at full speed.
They don't need to be super tight.
Okay, those are all nice and tight, and the last thing I need to do is tighten down the screws for the long stators. By the way, this is the tool I like to use for that, and you're going to need that because you've got space as a premium inside of this center body. I picked this up off of Amazon for a couple of bucks. Super cheap. Okay, there we have it, assembled, and it's ready to go. Alright, on to the next step. Okay guys, the next step is to put some flat spots on the motor, the shaft that we've already adjusted using the emery cloth. And I'll point out exactly what tools we're going to use to do that. One thing that you should have done by now is a partially assembled fan, as you can see here. This one has all the stator blades already installed. We've got the new motor mount installed in there, and I've got my newly adjusted mounts installed as well. So that's all ready to go. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our motor and get at least one of the M4 screws to hold it in place, just like so. I'm just lining it up, and that's the proper hole there. It's got two different size holes in there, and just make sure you're on the right one before you put the screw in there. So at this point, just go ahead and get this one tightened down. It doesn't need to be completely tight, just enough so that the motor's not going to move, kind of holds it there steady. All right, so that's good enough. The reason why I like to do this before I mark up the motor shaft for the flat spots is so that I can determine exactly where they need to be, and you want to be able to have access to it just like you see it here, so that it's perfectly perpendicular to the set screw that's eventually going to go there. So the set screw normally sits right about here, as you can see. At this point, you'd be able to have perfect 90-degree contact with that set screw. You will need to adjust or just make a small cutout in one of the stator blades, as can be seen here, to match the cutout in the face of the motor mount. Also, the hole that needs to go up in the top of the shroud here is about 35 millimeters back, and the way I figure out exactly where it needs to be as far as lineup goes, I'll just kind of eyeball by placing my wrench or something that is straight enough to be able to give me a good reference point. I'll just line it up with the center of the shaft, as you guys can see here. Okay, that's lined up pretty well. It goes right through the center of the And again, I'm just eyeballing it, but it's going right through the center of the cutout, and we can see exactly where it sort of comes out in the back, or towards the top of the shroud. You can see it on the inside of the shroud there, roughly there. Again, this doesn't need to be exact at this point. I just kind of eyeball where that spot is, and then I mark the front of it right about here using a marker. So right where you see my thumbnail there, I'll mark it with a marker. At that point, I have a reference point that I can use to mark the exact location where it needs to be. The distance from the leading edge here in the front of the fan, in front of the shroud, and where the hole needs to be is about 35 millimeters. All right. I just use a 4 millimeter bit to make this hole. You can adjust the size as needed. There's no exact science there, just enough so that you can get your Allen wrench through it later. So as you guys can see that I've already done this one, and that is perpendicular, or almost perfectly perpendicular to the motor shaft, which is what we're looking for, so that we can access the set screw at an exact 90 degrees. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and get the hub on there. We're going to screw it down just a bit, enough to mark the motor shaft, and then we'll have a reference as far as where we need to put the flat spots on there. I like to do 3 flat spots for a couple of reasons. Number 1, for balance. Number 2, just additional security there, additional safety for the motor as it's spinning up at the RPMs and the kind of power levels that we have it. Always good to have 3 flat spots on there. And also, every time you tighten down that set screw, you end up raising the material just a little bit off of that shaft. And obviously, we can run into issues when we try to pull the fan off because it's such a precise fit. You're not going to be able to pull the fan off very easily, even if you raise just the smallest amount of material off of that motor shaft, which is going to happen as you turn the set screw down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a second to get the hub on there. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down, and then I'll come right back to it. Okay, so I've got the hub on here at this point. As you guys can see, to find exactly where that set screw is going to be, it should be offset by 60 degrees from these 3 holes in the front of the motor shaft. That's how you know the location of where that set screw hole is in the back. Now, some of the center hubs or the rotor hubs that I send out, on some of them, the set screws are lined up with these holes. On some, they're lined up 60 degrees off. So just figure out which one you have, and it should be pretty simple from there. So as you guys can see now, I've got the Allen wrench in there, and it's actually in the set screw. I can, as I start tightening this down, I can feel that it's catching, and the set screw is tightening down. At this point, you don't want to over tighten it. You just need to do a little bit. That's enough right there, just to mark that the shaft, so you know where the flat spot needs to go. So I rotated it. We're going to do the next one. All right, that's enough right there. And finally, the third and last. So same thing there. So at this point, I should have enough of a mark on every single one to be able to figure out where it needs to be. And another word of advice, I pushed the hub all the way back, and it hasn't given me any problems. It leaves just enough space in the back to where it's not an issue. So we're going to go ahead and loosen these up again and pull this guy off. So there we go. All 3 are loose. Should slide right off. There we go. And now I'm just going to quickly check and make sure that I've got at least somewhat of a mark, and I do. So I'm going to go ahead and take the motor out of there, and we'll go from there. So stand by. Okay, so looking at the motor at this point, you guys can see I've already kind of put an indicator right here using a Sharpie of where that flat spot needs to be, and that was just based on where the set screw kind of dug into the motor shaft. The second one should be a little bit easy to see as I turn this. Hopefully it'll pop up here. Kind of difficult in the light, but it's located roughly about here. And again, I apologize, it's kind of hard to see on the camera here, but you should be able to see it when you have it in your hand. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the other 3, and then I'll come back and show you guys how to use the Dremel to make this happen. Okay, so here we are. I have all 3 spots marked with that Sharpie and you guys can see it pretty clearly on the camera here. I know there's a second set right here. You guys can see. Just disregard that one. That one I did by accident. The more accurate, precise one are the ones with the Sharpie here. So that's 3 of them. And the next step is to go ahead and get that flat spot using a Dremel. Let me go ahead and get set up for that, and I'll be back in a second again. Okay guys, what you're looking at here is just your basic Dremel. This thing I bought off of eBay years ago for 35 bucks. I'm sure anyone buying this or that's into RC probably has a Dremel, but that's all this is. The bit that you're looking at on here is a carbide bit specifically made for steel. Bought it for 3 bucks off of Amazon, and I'll go ahead and put a link with a picture in the video so you guys can purchase the same one if you don't have one. The basic idea here is to mount your Dremel down to a working table or whatever you have so that it's nice and secure. So as you guys can see, this thing is not going to move. It's nice and secure. The way that I secure it, anyone else should be able to do as well, is just with a clamp, as you can see here. Simply clamp down to my table, and again, just trying to prevent that thing from moving at all. Simple stuff here as far as how to mount it. There's a reason why I do it this way, because I want everyone to be able to use the tools that they have at home, because we don't all have access to machine shops, nor is it needed. The next step here is for me to ensure that this motor is lined up perfectly with the shaft of the Dremel. So as we can see right now, it's slightly uneven, which means I need to raise my Dremel up just a little bit so that the shaft on the Dremel is perfectly even as far as the height goes, the center point goes, with the shaft on the motor. So I'm going to do that by just placing something underneath the Dremel here to raise it up. Looks like about another 1/8 of an inch or so. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. Okay, so you guys can see at this point I've got it lined up pretty well. It's just a little bit, actually it's not off at all. It's lined up pretty much exactly. Just from the camera angle here, it's a little bit hard to tell, but I think I've got the camera just slightly low. However, that's the goal here. So just make sure you do your best to line up the center lines of both the Dremel and the motor the best you can. So along with that, at this point, the Dremel should be nice and stable, not going to move as you push the motor into it to grind that flat spot on there. That flat spot does not need to be a whole, it's not going to be a whole lot. It's maybe 1 millimeter at most, maybe 1.5 millimeters. And you guys will see what that actually looks like. But after you do the first one, you should be able to get the rest of them pretty easily. Another thing to do is to protect the motor. You want to make sure you put some tape or something to cover the front end. The way I do it is a piece of duct tape that's large enough to cover this entire face of the motor, and I'll go ahead and cut a hole in the middle of it that fits around the shaft almost exactly, and that's to prevent any of the metal bits, the metal dust from flying in there. So let me go ahead and get that on there, and we'll go ahead and start the process of the flat spots. Okay, so here is that piece of duct tape that I discussed. As you guys can see, it's pretty much the exact size in diameter as the motor, 50 millimeters, and there's the 8 millimeter hole in the middle. Just simply going to slip it onto the motor, and that's all you need to do to protect this thing and to prevent any metal from getting in there. So there it is. Let's go ahead and start the process of getting the flat spots on there now. First step is for me to make sure that it's lined up properly, both left and right, as you can see here as I move the motor. So left and right needs to be lined up properly, and I'm just looking at it from above, putting that dot exactly in the center point of the wheel, so right about here. Once that's done, the motor is kind of in the right spot. I take a look at the face of the shaft that I'm about to put the flat spot on,
and I just try to line up that dot right there on this on the shaft should be exactly in the center. And you can eyeball this again. It doesn't need to be perfect, 100% exact, but if you eyeball it, it's going to be close enough. So once I have that, I'll go ahead and slide that back into place. Once again, just double checking a couple times to make sure that it is in fact exactly centered in both directions, which right now it is. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the machine to put this flat spot on that shaft. So here it goes. Okay, so that's one of them, and we can see it right there. Almost perfect. Again, does not need to be that deep. In fact, this one's only about 0.5 millimeter, and you guys can see it there pretty well. All right, so that's how you get nice, perfect flat spots on this motor shaft. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of them, and I'll be back once it's all done.
Okay, guys, here's the finished product. Gonna go ahead and show you guys all 3 flat spots here. As you guys can see, they are almost perfect. They almost look like they are machined rather than done by hand. So you can get very good results here just doing this by hand. All right, this is more than enough right now to set you guys up for success and to never have issues with the new hub or this motor shaft. So the next step is to go ahead and get the. I'm just going to test the hub. So I take the hub and I'll throw it on there just to make sure that everything is in fact lined up, and the set screws are gonna be sitting exactly on that flat spot and nowhere else. So let's go ahead and see how that works out. Okay, guys, so I went ahead and tested the hub on there, tightened the set screws down a bit, and you guys can see it did mark the shaft exactly where the flat spot is. So here's one. You can kind of see it here as I move it around. Here is the second, and here is the third. So everything is nicely centered on all of them. Don't be afraid to go back and make adjustments on this if you need it. And you can also go back with the sandpaper, very fine sandpaper, and just sand it down if you're having trouble pulling the hub off and on off the shaft. So, but that's how you basically go through this process, and that's how you put the flat spots on there. So this is all done and ready to go, and we can go ahead and move on to the next step now. Okay, guys, next up we have the assembly of the rotor parts that you guys are going to need. Can be seen sitting in front of me here. Obviously all the blades, make sure you save those off your old fan, don't want to throw them out. The washer, this also needs to come off of your old fan, it needs to be saved. It may have some gunk and glue kind of built up in there from whoever had it before, so just make sure you give it a nice good cleaning so it'll fit well on the new hub. Along with that, save the 3 M4 screws, or actually I think these are I want to say these are 440 actually. So save those, all 3 of them. You're going to need them again. And then here is the new hub, the new part that you'll be receiving and using. So the process here is to build up pretty much the entire fan on the washer first, and then we're just going to slip the new hub into the back side of the new fan, and then press that together. And we'll talk about how we're going to do that here in a minute. But for now, realize that for anyone taking apart an old fan and reassembling it, it's going to be relatively easy because the blades will have already kind of expanded all these gaps that need to fit into the hub, as well as the washer. They've expanded slightly over time since you've had the fan, so it's going to be a relatively easy process. However, if you got brand new blades, it's going to be a little bit different or a little bit difficult because it's going to be harder to basically press everything together by hand. You can do it, you can get pretty close. It's just not as easy as an older blade, obviously, that's loosened up a little bit over time. So what I like to do is build up the fan on the washer first. Just as you guys can see here, there's the first blade in there, and I'm just going to go around the horn and get the rest of them in. If needed, if it gets a little bit difficult, just take a block of wood, small block of wood, and you can use some force to get these on there as tightly as possible, and that'll make your life easier as you go to put this thing in the vise. It won't fall apart in your hand. So I'm gonna have to do that on a couple of these here, so I'm gonna go grab that stuff, and I'll be back. Okay, so what I have here is just a block of wood that I'm gonna use to compress these down as much as possible, and all I do is simply place that block of wood on there. Once the blade is in position, just give it a light tap with the hammer, and that should help me out, at least for what I need right now. So there you go, blades are on there. And as I go around and put all these blades on by hand, I'm still trying to be as precise as I can as far as trying to line them up the best you can by hand. You're only going to be able to do so much, so just do the best job you can there, and the rest of it will kind of figure itself out when you press it all together. So I'm just going to repeat this process for all the blades, and I will be back as soon as that is done. Okay, here we are. I've got the washer in there with all the blades. Again, I did my best to line everything up the best I could, and this is a good enough solution at this point to move on to the next step. Next step is to take our new hub. I'm going to drop it in here. Might have to finagle it just a little bit to get it to drop in there, but it will, and everything is looking good so far. So next step is to put this thing in a vise. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, before you put this thing, put it in a vise or a press, you want to make sure that the holes that we can see now line up perfectly with and these are going to be for the screws that go into it. And one thing I like to do, just to ensure that that alignment does not get messed up as I start pressing all of this together, is that I like to I'll actually put one of the screws in there, and then I'll squeeze everything together, and I'll even take it over the vise just like this, or over to a press, and then this way we kind of ensure that there's going to be alignment once this is all over. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as you guys do this. I'll be using a press to make this happen, a hydraulic press that I got from Harbor Freight. I think I paid like $130 for it, probably one of the better investments I've made, because you can use that thing for a lot of different projects. If you don't have a press, you can use a vise. Just make sure that if you use a vise, to prevent damaging the surface finish on the back and on the front here, use a piece of wood. What I would do is I'd just take a piece of wood just like this one, maybe drill a hole in it big enough to fit around this this portion of the hub. Get that in there, put it in the vise, and then as you're squeezing everything together, this will prevent the vise from doing any damage to the surface finish. Also, depending on how big your vise might be, if it's a smaller vise where you're having to squeeze one side at a time, do a little bit at a time and keep this thing turning just like you would on a car tire. You never tighten down one lug nut at once. You do a little bit on all of them. You just keep going around the horn or go across. That way you get a nice even press when it's all done. So, however, for us, we're going to be using a press, and I'll go ahead and move on over to that, and let's see how that's going to go. Okay, guys, here's the press I'm going to use, and I've already got the blade set up in here. Underneath it, I have a couple of large metal plates, and that'll keep a nice even pressure on the back side of this as I press it together, as well as prevent any damage from occurring. So just going to take another look here, make sure it's all lining up properly, make sure that everything is centered, and then we can start the process here. Okay, that looks good. And here we go.
Again, this is not something you want to do. You want to do very slowly and be very methodical with it, because you want, number one, you don't want to damage anything, but bigger concern here is to make sure everything's aligned as it's going together. So let's see how it does. Okay, let's see how that came out. Go back to the table. It'll be a little easier. Okay, so here we are back on the table, and let's see how it came out. So the 3 holes here are completely aligned. Should not have any problems. I'm going to double check it by getting this screw in there. And yep, so that's perfectly lined up. Another thing I'm looking for is to make sure all the blades are even. So there's going to be just a little bit of the hub sticking out back behind the fan, and you want to take a very close look at that to make sure that it's the same amount all the way around. You don't want one portion to be more than the other. And what would be causing that is if the blades went on there unevenly. So in this case, they're on there even, and looks good. So this is it. The fan is ready, and you can go ahead and set this aside for now, and we'll look back at it once we're ready to go ahead and put this thing together. One thing I want to mention: I do put a little bit of Loctite on these screws as I put them in there. I don't necessarily think it's really needed. Just, you know, I just do it just in case they may have a tendency to come loose. I don't think they will, but just another precautionary item, I guess. But that's something you guys can do as well. Tighten these down, just snug. They don't need to be super tight. You also don't want to overdo it to where they break off or something. But that should do it. All right. Okay guys, finally we can go ahead and start assembling this entire fan together. Here's all my various pieces. I've got my shroud with all the stator blades in there. Here's our fan that we built up. We've got the motor ready to go. So it's got the flat spots on there and everything we need. And at this point, it's just a matter of putting it all together. And one other piece that we need to have ready is our heatsink, which is also ready to go right here. I've got some heatsink paste, and also need to get 4 screws for that motor to hold it in place. So that's all we need right there to make this happen. So let's get to it. First thing I'm going to do is on the motor, especially on this one. This is a 685. It runs kind of warm, so I try to get as much thermal paste on it as I can to get as much contact with the center body as I can. And primarily where that's going to happen is on the face of it. So I'll go ahead and get a little bit of thermal paste on here. Not a whole lot, just enough to give it some better contact. Okay, and then just kind of spread that apart on there the best you can. Get a little bit here on the sides. Okay, that should do it. Next step, we want to go ahead and get the motor in here. And go ahead and line everything up. So, alright, there we go. It's all lined up.
And now we can go ahead and get the screws in there.
Don't need to tighten these down too much, but should be snug enough that they're not going to come loose on you at all.
Okay, so there's that. The wires, you know, just kind of try to set it up however you guys need it to be, wherever you want them to come out. That'll be kind of up to you guys as you're assembling it all together. Now I'm going to make sure that the flat spot here, you guys can kind of see it right about here, needs to be pretty much lined up with the groove in the face of the center body. That way we'll be able to access it once the fan is on there to tighten down that set screw. So as you guys can see right now, that's perfect 90 degrees, and it's going to be very easy to find that set screw in there. So let's go ahead and move to that process. First thing I'm going to do is find where that set screw is, or at least one of them. It's right there, and I'm going to do my best to make sure this set screw is lined up with where this the flat spot is, so that as it slides on there, it's sitting in the right spot for us to tighten it down. So that'll be the next step, and I'm going to do that off camera here. Okay, the first set screw is, I found it, tightening it down. Again, I don't tighten it down completely right off the bat. I'll go ahead and give all of them. I'll torque all of them down just a little bit, all the way around. That way you don't get any kind of unevenness going. Again, just like you would do for the lug nuts on a car. Never want to tighten one down completely. Okay, and now I can go ahead and start tightening these. I haven't had any need to use Loctite on these so far. If you guys feel like you want to do it for additional security there, by all means go for it, but I have not had any need to do it so far. Alright, there we go, all nicely tight. Finally, we just have to put the heatsink on here and the spinner. Okay, getting the heatsink ready. Just put some thermal paste inside there, and I'm just gonna spread that out with my finger. It should pretty much be covering the entire surface. Okay guys, I've got the heatsink ready to go, got some thermal paste on the inside of that, and we're gonna go ahead and get it onto the motor. Keep in mind that there should be two fins here that are removed, and those need to fit over the long stators, over this guy and this guy. So as you're doing this, that's what you should be thinking about. To slide this on the motor, keep one finger over here, one finger here. You're gonna have to spread it apart just a tiny bit so that it can slip onto the motor, but don't overdo it, because then you'll enlarge it too much, and then it's not going to work out too well. So just keep an eye on that as you go through the process here, and let's see how it goes. Okay, you will end up losing a little bit of that thermal paste, and just clean that off with
some kind of scraper if possible. I wouldn't use a napkin necessarily to wipe it off initially because it will get just about everywhere. So use some kind of something to scrape it off with. And I'm going to get that done. I'll be back after that. Alright, here we have it. Fan is all assembled and ready for some testing. Last thing I need to do is go ahead and throw the spinner on here. We'll be looking good for a test run. One word of advice, if you guys can, I would recommend you test the fan, especially for an older fan. Test your fan first without the spinner, because I found that on the older fans, these spinners have been unbalanced a couple of times. So test it without the spinner, make sure it runs nice and smooth, and then test it with a spinner on the fan, and that way you can eliminate if it's a bad spinner or a bad fan, if you get any kind of funky vibration. It can also be the motor, like I mentioned elsewhere earlier in the video. So if it's the if it ends up being the motor, you know, unfortunately that's something you're gonna have to deal with the motor manufacturer. So, but just things to keep in mind. Alright, get the spinner on there. This is a brand new spinner, and they sometimes can be a little bit difficult, but shouldn't be impossible. And we'll just go ahead and tighten it down. Does not need to be overly tight, just enough that it's going to stay in place, and it should press the spinner on there evenly as well. There we go. Alright, there it is. Completely assembled and ready to go fan. Bring some new life into your airplanes. Alright, if you guys have any questions, feel free to post on the video. I answer them all the time, and appreciate your support for what I'm trying to do, and hope you guys have a awesome plane to fly after you put this in there. Thanks.